Hello, everyone, and welcome to the November 11th episode of the LGS Pod, the Soccer Shorts companion podcast where we highlight topics that affect local grassroots soccer culture here in our hometown of San Diego, as well as across the U.S. and around the world. I'm John Cross, founder of Soccer Shorts, and with me tonight, as always, is our co-host, Dylan Wilson. Dylan, how are you doing tonight?
I am doing well. I had the day off today. Thank you to our veterans and people who have, served our nation in one way or the other. I appreciate their sacrifice as well as the day off. So,
Day off is always nice, but
yeah.
yes, I didn't today, and I don't do much I don't do much anymore, right, in my health situation, but there was a time where I used to go out and do a lot more things on Memorial Day and Veterans Day, especially, I think, like many families, and especially many families in San Diego, have relatives who have served some way or another one of the branches. So that usually was a day in my family that we did some remembrance things, and I've gotten away from that, and I feel, I don't know, guilty sometimes. I think back and I easily could do some things, but I feel like, and this is a horrible excuse, but I feel like the day sneaks up on me sometimes, and I don't
100%.
plan as well as I should, but it is certainly a day we should be honoring our veterans and thanking everyone who has served. And we have a few times a year we do that, and we really think we should make the most of those days. But anyway, that's my little, I guess, speech or mea culpa for Veterans Day for myself here. Do you have anything else that you wanted to add before we give a quick preview of the episode?
No.
Okay, let's go ahead and jump into it. Today, we're going to be looking towards the future of women's soccer in the United States. We've done a lot of episodes really focusing on the men's game. We did an episode back in the spring looking at the history of women's sports and some key sports figures from San Diego, as well as our local women's teams that we have in the pre-professional arena. But we're going to look a little bit, try to, I think, use our crystal balls a little bit to look forward and see what it might look like in the future for women's soccer in this country, especially at a time right now where we're seeing tremendous growth in women's sports in general. And I think when you start getting tremendous growth, you also see some problems that rise up, especially this whole area of protecting women's sports. And I'm sure we'll talk about some of that a little bit later as well. But we're seeing NWSL, the Super League, USLW, WPSL, UWS, UPSL, all adding women's teams. And really, like, where are we going to go forward? The women have a chance with somewhat of not a completely blank slate, but maybe some things that aren't as entrenched as the men's game. So, well, I'll phrase it this way. Will the women be able to overcome some of the hurdles that the men have faced in trying to organize a more coherent soccer structure? Or are the women destined for the soccer wars that have plagued the men's side, for 100 years, really? So we'll have some discussions around all those things as we get into our main topic. But first, we'll review some current events, and we'll kick it off with a new segment we started last week, looking back at soccer history. We don't have a San Diego specific soccer history for today, partly because I didn't quite have the time. It's really hard to dig and find the information for San Diego, but hopefully we'll get back on track for next week. So today I broadened it out a little bit and stumbled across this, which I vaguely remember from when it happened, but it took me stumbling across it to remind myself. But back in 1987, Welsh striker Mark Hughes, he played 2 professional games for 2 different teams in 2 different countries on the same day. So Czechoslovakia in a Euro qualifier. They played, well, Wales lost 2-0 in that match, but immediately after the match, he hops on a plane. He flies over to Germany, comes in as a second half sub in a DFB Pokal match for Bayern Munich against Gladbach. So 2 games, 2 countries in the same day. I'm not sure he was the first person to do it. I'm not sure if it's been done again. I know sometimes there have been a day after or something super close, people flying around, but Dylan, you have any idea if that's
I didn't even
ever
know
been
that that
done
had
before?
happened even once. That seems like a terrible idea. I know.
It
So
does
I
seem like
doubt.
nowadays I'm not even sure anybody would even attempt it. You,
Well,
you pick.
I mean, shit. Even back in the day, like still, I feel like people would realize that's not a great idea. But I don't know. Whatever. Guess not.
Yeah. Yeah, and then every time I come across Czechoslovakia, I just think about also how much the eastern part of Europe has changed in my lifetime specifically. That I think that was in the 1990 World Cup. I think that was the U.S. first opponent was Czechoslovakia. I think they lost
Yeah, I think it would have
five
been in the early
five one
'90s
to
that they
them.
peacefully separated into the two countries we
Yeah,
think of today. Yeah, I mean, to that point, I I always I never hesitate to bring up the Balkans because I always have I don't know I have some affinity for that region and having enjoyed my time there a few times. But I mean, I think it's fair to say Yugoslavia could have won a World Cup at this point had they not completely disintegrated, and that's another another topic in and of itself. But there's a whole I mean, we could do a whole episode about that too. The way that they intentionally invested in youth football and sports in general, and it's totally paying dividends across sports, right now. So, anyway, getting off track, but yeah, it is kind of interesting to think how geopolitics has affected the modern football landscape like that.
yeah. I just made a note, so maybe we will circle back to that
Yeah,
another time.
it's
Do a
super
little
interesting.
research.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's move to some San Diego news. Even though we didn't have a San Diego specific this day in soccer history, of course, we had our big playoff matches this last weekend, San Diego versus Portland, in both the NWSL and Major League Soccer. The Wave, unfortunately, were not victorious on their away match up in Portland, but SDFC was. And I was not able to watch the game. I went back and watched the highlights. I don't know if you watched the game, Dylan, so you maybe will have to fill in some of the details for me. But when I watched the highlights, that game looked like, as much as the score line seems like a crushing defeat. I saw like Portland had some chances that they really ought to have scored, and I think that would have made a very different game. Certainly happy that San Diego won, but I wasn't sure, and I haven't been able to talk to anybody if that was as convincing a win as the score line indicated.
I was not able to watch the game. So I also just watched the highlights actually today. And I kind of got that same impression, although at the same time, that's how the highlight packages are edited, right? To show you the
Right.
chances. So I don't know. I think it would be worth asking somebody who was watching the game, and funnily enough, maybe not somebody who is in like the supporters section. Just not that we don't appreciate their opinion, but just because they might have been a little bit focused on a couple of things. So yeah, I don't know. I agree, but hey, they're gonna have a home game as long as they're winning. So, and from
That's
here, it's
right.
it's one and done. So that's great. I'm excited for like we talked about before. More than excited for the club or the. I'm excited for the players, of course, but I'm just excited for all our friends over in the supporters section, especially who worked so hard to make this what it is.
Yes, and I agree, and I am thrilled for all of them. Even if it was closer than the scoreline indicated, it must have been, even for some of us who were loyal fans who never won a playoff match, actually be in a packed stadium and have a resounding victory like that.
Well, and I think an important thing too, and I think I probably said this last week. Like, can you imagine if they got into like the 20th minute and it was still 0-0, the 40th minute and it was still 0-0. The way that like every 10 minutes would ratchet up the anxiety then, right? Scoring in the 5th minute, like you completely
Yeah.
take all of that away. And so that's what they needed to do, and they did it. So credit to them. I hope they can keep it rolling. It's what, 2 weeks now? We have it because of the international
Yes,
break.
and it'll be on a Monday night because I believe SDSU has a match on
Sick.
Saturday, a
Oh,
home
so the
match.
field will be in tip-top shape then too.
Yeah, we'll
I don't know if
see.
you
And
noticed in the even in the highlight package in some close-ups, you could see the like lines between patches of turf on the field. It wasn't necessarily in stupendous, shape the other night, and that was when they had like a week to prepare for it. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see how that goes.
well, my understanding, I thought before the last match is they laid down some new turf. So I don't
Well,
know
maybe
if
that's what I was
that's
seeing because I did see some obvious seams in turf. So we'll
yeah,
see.
I don't know. But the next match will be on the Monday before Thanksgiving, whatever that
That's
date
the
is,
24th.
24th.
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
Because I think there's some kind of clause, if I remember correctly, that there can't be a match like the next day, like
Mm-hmm.
24 hours or 24 hours after a football game. I don't know. But so it's going to be on a Monday night. And then speaking of the supporters, SD Fronteras, for those who are part of the union and didn't know, there was a State of the Union last night by the president, vice president, Miguel and Vanessa, and San Diego Punto Football, Tony and Chiva both facilitated that. I started to watch it this morning and I got interrupted. So I haven't watched the whole thing, but they did an annual State of the Union, which is good. So I'm looking forward to go back, especially with my connections, to go back and hear what they have to say. But for anybody else out there, if you're curious about the union and what they're doing, or you're part of the union and you want to know like where your money's been spent and what's going on and what the plans are, you should probably go check that out. And again, go to the San Diego Punto Football website. You can find it there. I'm sure you can find it on the SD Fronteras site as well. Okay, we'll go some more current events now, but sticking with MLS, since we've been talking about SDFC, the MLS did announce their coaches of the year, or coach of the year, and I was not so surprised by the winner. I think I was more surprised that Mike Ivaras came in third in coach of the year voting. Bradley Carnell, coach of Philadelphia, which won the Supporter Shield, which if you win the Supporter Shield, I think that coach ought to be in the conversation no matter what.
Sure.
Vancouver and STFC were both top of the table, most of the season and going back and forth, especially towards the end there. So I could see all those coaches, and I get it. Bradley Carnell, first year at Philadelphia, taking them not only back to the playoffs, but winning the Supporter Shield. And I know, well, I don't know because I don't follow it closely, but I've heard a lot how Vancouver suffered some pretty serious injuries through the year, and Jesper Sorensen seemed to keep that team going. But when you're a coach of an expansion team, and maybe this is my soft spot for Mikey Varas, but when you're a coach of an expansion team that has no existence, like Philadelphia has a great youth academy and structure in place. Like when you come in as a new coach, you're tweaking things as you come in. If you're Mikey Varas, you're starting from scratch. Everything is brand new. And then to win the division, I could maybe see how he didn't get first. I just am very shocked that he was third in that.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't even really pay any attention to those things, to be honest. It does seem kind of harsh, but at the same time, I mean, that is kind of, I don't know. I feel like in American sports, it's, that's first goes to most deserving, often second will go to the best story because, like, or not the best story,
Yeah.
but the most marketable story. And I don't think you can say the MLS isn't guilty of doing that every
Yeah.
now and then.
Yeah.
So,
All right, well, staying with MLS, the MLS deputy commissioner and some president, SUM president, Gary Stevenson, is set to retire after the World Cup, I believe. But sometime coming up here soon, and he's been instrumental in a lot of the TV deals, and that to me wasn't like huge news. I don't really care. What I was more interested when I read this article in The Athletic was the hints at a couple of different things. One, leadership restructuring happening within Major League Soccer. And then the other thing was, which we've already heard some things about, structural changes coming to Major League Soccer. Now, they didn't say at all what they were, but just kind of teased, very excited about the new things that are coming soon and will be announced soon, but didn't say when soon. So I have some ideas of what some of those things, could be. But Dylan, do you have any thoughts or takes on what MLS might have in plan coming up here, besides the calendar change, which they seem to have basically told everyone they're doing, they just haven't said when? And any idea what else might be coming on the horizon?
Yeah, I don't know. It's tough to say because it seems like I don't know, they've kind of floundered in their Leagues Cup ambitions a little bit, and subsequently in their efforts to kill the Open Cup have kind of Streisand affected that a little bit, I think. So yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see where they pivot. You wonder if maybe they'll start working harder to get their tendrils out in MLS Next Pro and make that more robust and effort to compete more with USL as they try to build out that structure. I'm not sure. I guess that's maybe me being kind of cynical about it. I think they'll probably look to continue to expand because, Ponzi scheme gotta keep scheming, right? I think that's kind of the whole issue with that expansion fee model, is that it's somewhat dependent on it.
Yeah, it was interesting to me because I read that article and had those hints, and then listened to one of the recent morning kick around podcasts, and they had the president, CEO, I'm not sure which, of Chattanooga FC. And he also was talking about, being an independent team in MLS Next Pro. And because one of the questions was, well, how is it for your fans, like for away matches? Because not many people go to watch the reserve teams play. We experienced that when we were loyal fans and we had the reserve teams playing in the USL Championship. But he also had almost what felt a little bit like a throwaway comment, but he said, "Yeah, it's not that much now. There's only 5 or 6 teams, but when we hit 50 teams and half of them are independent teams, it's really going to be different." And then they just kind of moved on with the conversation. But that really struck me. Like, why would you say that unless that's internal conversations they're having, is really grow out MLS Next Pro, and then if that's the case, what's the carrot for an independent club to join MLS Next Pro as opposed to stay or come to USL or a different league?
Yeah, I don't know. So like I said, I haven't really been keeping up with any of this, but that's kind of an interesting comment because there's really not a way to interpret it that isn't, you know, at at least somewhat like eyebrow raising. Because I mean, if you take it at face value, okay, when we hit 50, sure, that's very pie in the sky thinking, very tech bro talking AI, like kind of, oh, it'll all be okay when it's okay kind of logic, but whatever. Setting that aside for a second, even if the league is, so say we're at 50 and every MLS club has a reserve team, which I don't think that's the case currently, but let's just say hypothetically. So you figure that's 30 reserve teams and 20 non-reserve teams, like 20 independent teams. That still means 60% of your away games are dog shit, which probably means 60% of your home games are, like, at best sparsely attended. So it's kind of, I don't know. It's one of those things where, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is I see why he brushed past it pretty quickly, because I don't think breaking down that statement or situation really leads to any sort of, like, I don't know, I don't want to say like positive conversation, but like any conversation they want to be having right now, I think. So yeah, I don't know. That's kind of interesting to hear. And again, like I said, that to me sounds a lot like, you know, when Sam Altman, you know, CEO of OpenAI, says things like, "Oh, well, don't worry about the power grid issues that we're already having because AI will figure it out in the future." It's like, well, hold on a second.
Yeah, the problem will figure out the solution.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like, and I'm not saying that it's identical, but it's kind of, you know, like, oh, well, when we have 50 teams, it'll, well, like, first of all, how are you going to get there? Like you said, what's the carrot? Especially if USL theoretically gets this pyramid up and running. But even if it did, even if you do, like, again, that's still 60% reserve teams. That's a tough sell at best.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I don't know, don't know which way it'll go. I know there's the MLS Board of Governors meeting this week. Um, they're usually pretty tight-lipped about what happens at those, unless Don Garber chooses to share that, at some point. And usually they do some kind of state of the league around MLS Cup, so maybe we'll get some indication on one, the calendar change, and maybe any other ideas they are floating. But I think what's happening in USL is really causing Major League Soccer to reconsider some things maybe that they weren't interested in doing before.
I
So
think too that they may have underestimated the degree to which the minor league baseball kind of MILB, MILS, right? I guess we could call it, like,
yeah,
set up
right.
for their pyramid, quote unquote. I think they might have underestimated the degree to which, like, somebody who is a soccer fan who is, like, at all aware of the game outside of MLS, like, knows that that's just not it. You know, like, they know that
Right.
it gets so much more entertaining if you want it to at a lower division level. So it's like, I think that it's different than baseball fans who, like, we're so many generations removed from an independent, like, lower league structure in baseball that, like, modern fans can't even imagine what that would look like. Whereas in soccer, we could, you know, literally look anywhere else in the world and we have an example.
Right. Right. Yeah. It'll be interesting. And ultimately, as I've said before with other things, the fans will ultimately shape this. The
Yeah.
market will shape it. But this is part of the problem also with our soccer wars that we have. And we'll talk about that a little more when we look at the women's side a little more closely. Before we wrap up the current events, though, do you care to comment at all, or we can skip past it is fine, but on FIFA's brand new manufactured Peace Prize that we all know who the
Yeah,
recipient is going to be?
I do actually. I have two kind of two things I want to talk about here. First of all, so first of all, I think it is obviously ridiculous, but I think it maybe it's just so obvious that that's why nobody's talking about this aspect of it. But, like, to me, I feel the aspect that it's called the Peace Prize, like, in an obvious try to way to, like, assuage the fact he's not going to win the fucking Nobel Peace Prize, is, like, so goddamn embarrassingly cynical. And maybe that's just kind of, like, baked into all the conversation about the cynicism, but I feel like I haven't heard a lot of people call out that specific detail as just, like, the comic book level of absurdity that it is. So whatever, I don't know. That's kind of made me laugh. But I so I'm in I don't know, I'm gonna approach this delicately, but, like, I'm in
All right.
several different, you know, like, Discord servers or whatever, with a variety of different reasons for being in those servers, with a variety of different people, right? I would say, generally speaking, the majority of my cohort, both online and in real life, tends to, I'm not going to say, like, align with me politically, but we tend to have generally similar outlooks on, you know, the purpose of government, the role of society, like, what it means to be a good person, things like that, right? However, I do, like, there are people that I have respect for and I like, and I'm, you know, totally willing to have a conversation with and spend time with. in some of these circles who don't fit that description, right? Like, I don't think they're bad people, but we also don't see the world the same way. And that is to say that some of them are, Trump people, and that's fine. Like, well, whatever. I don't want to get into whether or not that's fine, but I digress. But it's like, I saw one of them, whenever somebody talks about Trump in this server, like, they just post the jerk and the ghost stance gif, and it's like, just to annoy people. And like, when it's a policy thing or whatever, it's like, it does annoy me. Like, I'm not gonna lie, it does get to me, and I'm sure that's the point. But like, whatever, I get it. People have political differences, but this felt so like sad, because it's like, you're posting, like, you're treating this grown man, this nearly 80-year-old president, being treated like an 8-year-old, and you're like, treating that like it's embarrassing for anybody but him. Like, I don't know, it just,
right,
like, it's one thing to be like, yeah, fuck yeah, Trump, when, like, whatever, he's rounding up everybody with like a dose of melanin in their skin. And like, I'm not saying that's fine, but like, at least I can like see, like, okay, for you in your head and nowhere else, but whatever, in your head, that's a win. Sure, you're celebrating it. I think it's disgusting, but okay. But like, this just is, I don't even know how to describe it. It's just like, it's not even that it's angering. It's just like pathetic. It's like, how are you treating this like this is embarrassing for anybody on earth, but I guess every American. It's like, it baffles me. And like, I know we're 10 years into this, so I should be like beyond being confused by this stuff at this point. But it's like, how are you not embarrassed by that? Like, I don't know. Yeah. So anyway, like I said, I respect these people generally, and I enjoy their company, but like, sometimes I'm like, man, it's good we don't talk about this stuff, because like, I just don't think there's really anything constructive to come out of it. Sorry, that was a long-winded rant, but I just like, in a decade of like embarrassing things that have happened, that someone would look at Donald Trump getting a made-up award to like help his feelings feel better and think like, fuck yeah, somehow has managed to baffle me even 10 years into this. I don't know.
yeah. It's I will be floored if Trump doesn't get it. I mean, I guess in an outside way, I could see Messi maybe being
No. Here's the thing:
but
they have to give it to Trump now because they made a big deal out of it. What do you think is going to happen if they give it to anybody else? He's going to throw a fucking tantrum.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, and again, it's just another one of these things that, really pushes me further and further away from wanting anything to do with the World Cup proper.
Which is sad.
Once it gets here. Yeah, which is terribly sad.
Yeah.
But now that we got most of the the big world current event stuff out of the way, yeah, let's switch over and get to some cup news, because we recently had the round 3 of the 2026 qualifying rounds for the US Open Cup, or for the 2026 US Open Cup. And we attended the match between SD Enter and City SC, and which SD Enter won, which means we now know the opponent. So they've done the draw. They figured out that SD Enter will be playing Laguna United in round 4, their same opponent they played last year.
Oh, really?
For the berth. That. Yeah. So it's a rematch of last year's final match to see who makes it to the Open Cup proper. So Laguna United won that match at Mission Bay High School last year. They went to the Open Cup. Yeah. So now SD Enter is going up to Laguna to face Laguna United on, I believe it's Saturday the 22nd.
Yes, at 4 p.m.
And I am making plans and trying to work out my schedule to be up there. I hope we can at least get the same group that we had before, and maybe add a few more people, and go have some fun at an Open Cup. Again, whoever wins this, we will see them in the first round of the Open Cup proper next spring.
I not not to put anybody on blast, but I think Steve Ball and Ken Garden, who were at the game last time with us, are both in. It sounds like from talking with them. So we'll probably try to carpool or something. I've talked to a few people who I'm, some lukewarm maybes. So we'll see. I'm gonna see what I can do to work them.
Yeah, I'm going to work on some people as well, and especially since Wave are no longer playing
I
and
think that was a factor
SDFC's
for people as
match
well.
doesn't
Yeah.
doesn't happen till the Monday. Maybe we can get a few more people, might free up their schedule and go on up there, and we'll have a good kind of away day.
Yeah, and it'll be, I guess choosing who to root for in these last two games was somewhat arbitrary because they were all San Diego-based teams. But
Right.
this time it is not arbitrary. It's, San Diego versus the evil Orange Empire from the north. So,
Yeah, we haven't had a San Diego team in. We missed out completely last year, so of having anybody in the Open Cup proper.
Inter's our only chance because I don't think SDFC will be in it next year either.
Yeah, if they're playing in the CONCACAF, Champions Cup, then yeah, they likely will not be in the Open Cup unless.
Do we know if SDFC has plans to have a next pro team? I know there was talk that they weren't planning on doing that, but I know that was a while
ago. From my experience before, when I was president of the union, at that time, so we're talking a year ago now, but at that time there were no plans to have an MLS Next Pro team. Right to Dream and what they do through Right to Dream is their feeder system.
Sure.
So they have a Right to Dream International, which is a traveling team, youth team that goes around and plays some of their best players from all their different academies. And then they try to get people into academy systems. So no, to my best understanding, at least from when I had more of those connections, is Right to Dream is their development pathway. They will not have an ex-pro team.
Well, I guess the reason I ask, and I don't expect that you'll have an answer to this, but maybe I'm just more curious for your thoughts. Do you think it's possible that in the next 5 years or even sooner potentially, MLS mandates that clubs have next pro teams in an effort to squeeze out regions that could potentially go USL? I mean, that sounds like something MLS would do if I'm being honest.
Well, right. And I think that's kind of what they've done. I think there's DC United might be one of the few teams that doesn't have.
They had to divest in Loudoun to a certain degree. I think they're only minority owners now.
So I don't know. I don't we need to get someone on the show or something who knows a little bit more about Major League Soccer. But my understanding is that was the push from MLS, but I think San Diego, again, from my understanding, has a bit of an exception because of the whole Right to Dream and Right to Dream model.
Well, and they paid $500 million. So
yeah, well, right. I mean, these that got me thinking about getting off on a whole other topic, but we'll save that for another time. But to continue with college stuff, the Women's College Cup, the bracket's been set, so that's starting up this weekend. And then on the men's side, I think the final conference, the finals for the conferences all wrap up this coming weekend, I believe. So we should have the men's bracket by next week, early next week. But the Women's College Cup, I skimmed through the teams. I think our closest team, because they only have 32 teams in there, is UCLA. I think that's our closest team to where we are here in San Diego. So it'd be a bit of a trek to get up to see a match. I'm not even sure if they're hosting the first round or not. But I did double check some of our Division I men's teams earlier today to see where they stand. And it looks like, I don't know if the rankings I saw were the most recent ones, but USD, University of San Diego, was ranked 7th in the nation. And they don't do in the WCC a conference tournament. So I think Oregon, Portland, and San Diego were all ranked very high. So likely that they will get in. San Diego State, they're already out of their conference tournament, so they have no chance. They didn't have a super strong season. So University of San Diego, it looks like our hope again. Last year they made it to the Sweet 16, so maybe
I
we
was gonna
can
say.
get some home games there at USD. I think on the 20th, right? So that Thursday, right
Mhm.
before that Open Cup round, will be the first round. We'll have to see if they host. So depends how the season finishes and depends what happens. Obviously, with the how the bracket gets sorted. But if they're that high of a seed, or if they're that ranked that high nationally, they should get a pretty decent seed in the brackets. So hopefully we'll get at least one home game that we can check out over there at Torero Stadium and get a bunch of people back for that one as well.
Yeah, fingers crossed. That would be fun. It was good to be back last year.
And the last thing for cup competitions, did you happen to catch at all? And I only caught the highlights because I didn't watch it, but the Canadian Premier League had their final. Did you catch that all? Their
I
snow
saw
game.
highlights. I didn't watch the game.
Yeah, the game was covered in snow. If I read things correctly, between the end of regulation and the beginning of extra time, I think there was a 90-minute delay so they could try to clear snow off the
Wow.
pitch so they could play. It was bad. It was like that US qualifier against Costa Rica that was in Colorado in the Denver area. I don't know, 10 years ago, whenever that
Wow.
was, that snow game. But it
Yeah,
was
yeah, yeah.
it was where they're using blowers to just try to make sure the lines are available, but it's in snow. But the winning kick was a bicycle kick goal that they've already nicknamed the icicle kick.
Ha! That's great.
Yeah. So it was it was fun and it was interesting with the highlights, but what it did also was set off, at least in my stuff that I follow, a flurry of conversations about the calendar change and switching to a more traditional European calendar or staying on the summer kind of calendars that MLS, USL, all the other men's leagues are on at the moment. So it was interesting to see some of those. I'm sure we'll circle back to some of those conversations, but I always, people are like, you know, and people want to switch to a winter league and have these kind of games, and I'm thinking, for me, one of the biggest things, there's a whole slew of reasons why I think switching to a more European calendar is better in the long run, and frankly, not too much different than what we're already doing now in terms of when leagues start mid-February and when they potentially end early December, even though you're not having a full slate of league games being played, at least not all the way through December. But, and then this argument about going up against the NFL and college football. Like, why would you have what is supposed to be your top game potentially being played in this poor weather conditions when your top game could be played in May or June? And yes, there's other things you could be up against, but you could have it in much better weather conditions for your final game.
And also,
But
the only things you're
anyway,
looking at competing with then, even though I think that's a stupid argument, like in and of itself, would be the NHL Stanley Cup Final or the NBA Finals, which both are big and have big followings, but are also 7-game series. So, like, your one-off final will get the attention you feel it deserves. Yeah, I agree, and that's kind of my kind of similar argument is like having the playoffs in the shitty part of the year weather-wise kind of doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Um,
yeah.
so
Yeah, well, we'll save the bulk of that conversation. I'm sure that might be a highlight of one of our shows a little later as someone actually begins their transition. Because someone is. Like, we know MLS probably will. So I'm sure that's a conversation that people will be having over the next few years. But if we switch to some lower league news and, kind of the lower league, I think I had it in the notes summer shuffle, but really like winter shuffle. We're in playoffs. Teams are already getting knocked out. We're starting to see player movement, but we're also starting to see team movement, which is what happens in the United States. We don't have promotion relegation, so we have teams either self-relegate like we saw last week with Texoma. We have new leagues like the League for Clubs already starting to make announcements of new clubs that are getting ready to join. For Texoma, in terms of USL, they just had a new announcement for a new club in Salina, Texas called Rodeo FC, which is a little bit south of Sherman, which is where Texoma was based. And this now appears to be the ownership group that was involved with Texoma is now doing this team, Rodeo Soccer Club, and they're going to be, affiliated with Texoma, which will still play, I guess, at USL 2. So that was kind of the shuffling of some of the news that we saw, at least of those teams. And I'm going to give you a chance to comment on those before I get to this last shuffle, because that will lead us into our main story.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because, like you said, without the promotion and relegation, although I suppose what happened in North Carolina maybe wouldn't have been prevented by a more unified structure, though I don't know. But yeah, it can't come soon enough. All this like talk about, this administrative repositioning is just like so not what I wish I was thinking about. It's important, but I just wish I didn't have to give a shit about it.
Yeah, and then our final one we'll talk about, which will carry our conversation over into the state of women's soccer, Edgewater Castle FC. There was a big announcement that their men's team, they'll have a men's team in USL 2, and they're going to have a women's team in USLW. So still at the pre-professional level on both sides. But it was interesting because Edgewater Castle, if I have the information correct, won the UWS, United Women's Soccer title this last year on the women's side. And on their men's side, they were playing in the Midwest Premier League in a conference that has 2 divisions. So they were in Division 2 on the men's side, not even Division 1. So I don't know if this announcement, because it's not clear, is pulling both of those teams out of those leagues. So here's how we, in the US, we cannibalize things. So I don't know if this is a situation where we're taking these teams from other leagues and now moving them to a new one, USL, or if they're going to keep a second team in those areas to kind of have a reserve team. So the women still keep a reserve team in UWS, and the men still keep a reserve team in the Midwest Premier League. So I don't know which is the case, but I think this, ultimately, I think over the next 5 years, especially once you really get promotion relegation started on the USL side, if it's successful, you're going to see a lot of reshuffling of teams around leagues. I think in the meantime, people are going to wait and see, and some may wait and see whether it's going to be successful or not, or how that plays out. But this is one of the frustrating things about soccer in the United States is we have so many teams, and we have a lot of teams that could go up a little bit of a level, and then maybe over time could go up more levels, but we don't have the structure because leagues compete against other leagues, and we have this hundreds of teams at this pre-professional level that have visions of going higher, but we don't have the structure in place for them to get there unless they find a rich owner and they're able to make that huge investment leap to go up to whatever the lowest professional rung is, which really on the women's side right now is Division 1. There isn't anything in between. There might be in another year, and we'll talk about that in a second.
Wasn't there the USL
2
Super
years,
League?
I guess. The Super League is Division 1 and NWSL is Division 1.
Oh, that's true, isn't it? Huh?
Yeah. And USLW is technically pre-professional.
That's right.
So we don't have the baby steps for people to, do a little better and move up to the next rung. It's a gigantic leap for them. And again, as Chris Kessel likes to say, U.S. soccer works exactly as designed. This is how we've designed it. So Anyway, I'll give you some comments on that if you have any, and then we'll jump into our women's soccer segment.
Yeah, I mean it's not only detrimental to the clubs and the communities that the clubs, are ostensibly trying to represent, but it's detrimental to the player development too. I think it's not the only reason, but I think the lack of a unified pyramid has hampered player development on the men's side in the United States. And I think that long run, it's not going to help player development on the women's side either. This isolated pyramid, or lack of a pyramid, I guess, rather, because it doesn't allow the best players to rise to the top. So I don't know. I mean, I guess this is getting into what we're going to talk about. I unfortunately see a lot of parallels in the way that the women's game is headed, from the soccer wars past on the men's side. And it's fundamentally anti-American. It stifles innovation, stifles the American dream vis-a-vis soccer, I guess.
And I think on the women's side, especially, since that's what we're shifting gears into, on the women's side, you have, I think, some very, very good and talented players playing at the pre-professional level that could play up at Division One and especially at Division Two levels. But we don't have that gap. It's not that we don't have the players, and I think it's true on the men's side as well. It's not that we don't have the players. We don't have the infrastructure in teams and ownership groups and whatever else to kind of build out a more robust pyramid. But we certainly have the players. We have players who could fill in those gaps and create more teams.
Absolutely. And plenty of communities that would happily welcome those teams that aren't getting the opportunity.
Right. Okay, so let's officially dive into our final segment here and looking at both the current state of women's soccer in the US and where things maybe could be headed, which I think is very difficult to figure out right now, but we'll talk about some of the reasons why. But our big question was, is women's soccer doomed to follow the same soccer wars path that the men's side? And spoiler alert, I think yes, because just like on the men's side, there is no strong leadership. Now, could a league like USL provide some structure? Maybe. But I haven't seen them even talk about it on the women's side in terms of promotion relegation, only on the men's side. So I don't know if they're just going to focus on one and work the kinks out and then try to move things over. If USL is serious about doing promotion relegation on the men's side, I don't see how they could not be serious about also tackling it on the women's side. I would just love to hear a timetable for them. And that's kind of jumping the gun here a little bit. So I'm going to pause that. We'll circle back to that question. But before we really get into this, Dylan, I wanted to ask you, what would be your take right now of women's sports in general in the US, especially over the last couple of years?
I would say that there's been like an unprecedented level of excitement for women's sports that has largely been failed to be capitalized upon. Ooh, that was passive voice there. You know what I mean, though. That has not been capitalized upon because people are trying to do it money first. And I'm not saying there hasn't been an increase in exposure for women's sports and growth in the game, but the way it all has to be organized under the umbrella of strong capital first just stifles the growth. And I think this is what we've seen on women's soccer. I think the NWSL, for all of its successes, has also gotten in the way of the genuine grassroots growth of the game. And people always talk about, and this is true on the men's side as well, the growth of the game, and what they mean is the value of clubs at the top level. And like
Yeah,
I don't
the
equate
value of the
those,
franchise.
right. I don't equate those things at all. And so I think that's kind of where the NWSL is falling down the same, the same path the MLS did, except I'm not gonna say that it's their fault necessarily. It's the lack of structure provided by the U.S. Soccer Federation, really. We've talked about this a lot, but it's when you have a federation that has no interest in actually governing club soccer domestically, it incentivizes this sort of cannibalistic competition, and a cannibalistic competition that is not healthy in a traditional like free hand of the market sense, even though, again, whole other conversation,
Right.
because sports teams writ large are not like your average product. If you are dissatisfied with your sports team, you can't just decide to go to a different one like you would a product or service, because that's not how it works. And so I think that it ultimately taking that approach kind of stifles the growth. But and existing in an environment wherein that's incentivized is going to create some good business decisions, I guess, that are poor sporting decisions.
Right. Right. And I think that's just generally what MLS has suffered with when well, people on the inside, I think there's some people on the inside of the MLS that are very protective of Major League Soccer because we now have and I'll call it a strong first division. It's not going anywhere. We have new stadia, soccer specific stadia around the country that are, wonderful to go watch a match in. So there are things that have certainly been beneficial, but I also think from a lot of people from the outside, I've had it sometimes, and I will admit I've watched Premier level matches and La Liga and Serie A and Bundesliga matches that are painful to watch sometimes. But I just watch, there's again, I think NWSL has this a little bit that you have some people that are playing at a level, significantly higher than some of the other people on the pitch. Whereas you look at some other leagues, it's not quite the same. And I think NWSL, MLS, they have that the business drives everything because everything's about television, marketing, markets, consumers. The sport is just the vehicle that they're playing in to have an investment and make money via growth, not make money year over year in terms of profit, but in terms of increasing your value. So when you do sell it, you make a probably, even with some losses along the way, a tidy profit. All right. Before we get too far in this, I don't think we can have maybe a more honest conversation about women's sports and some of the hurdles that are facing if we don't address this whole protect women's sports issue that we have going on in every area of high level competition that involves women and things that are labeled as women's sports. So I'll give you kind of first crack to jump in on any of your thoughts about, we could phrase it as trans issues, but I think that really misses the point. I think anyway, I'm going to let you jump in first and then I will jump in, but go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like at face value, if you just like if you literally just take the statement like men shouldn't play in women's sports at face value, like that is like not something I disagree with, right? But like that's not what these people are really saying when they say that. What they're saying is they think that men choose to transition to women or present that they
To
are,
gain an advantage.
right,
Yeah.
to get an advantage. And I have to say, one of my biggest disappointments with like any sort of left-leaning politics in this country is I don't think I've heard any prominent politician ever just like summarily reject the idea that that happens, because that doesn't happen. Like flat out does not happen. Um, People transition because they are not comfortable in the body they're born in, and people don't transition or get like medical transition assistance willy nilly. And if somebody was, at least, I mean, I can only speak to the state of California because like this is where I live, and I care about policy, and so like I've looked into it here. But it somebody who was trying to like get medical transition like assistance and like documentation change just so they could get a sporting advantage would be sussed out so goddamn fast and be denied so goddamn fast. It's kind of like not even an issue. And so I think that's kind of where I've just been kind of really disgusted by all of it, is that it, like, we're all getting bogged down in this conversation about a thing that literally does not happen. And I think part of
Yeah.
the issue is that people are either unable or unwilling or afraid to like call out that this like framing that I've just laid out is what people are actually saying when they say like protect women's sports, or keep men out of women's sports, like whatever. And like I wish people would point that out, because it is, again, flat out not happening. It's like when people bitch about, or like I think Texas just passed a state constitutional amendment barring non-citizens from voting. And it's like, well, congrats, but like that literally wasn't happening and
I know.
doesn't happen. So it's I think, I mean, like, there is a lot more nuanced like societal issues to be discussed here, and I think there is a real conversation to be had around like what do we mean when we say women's sports, right? But that conversation is not the one that's happening. And I think my biggest disappointment with all of it is the way that nobody has like, no prominent person, it seems, has just pointed out that that actually doesn't fucking happen, like at all, not even a little bit.
Yeah. My biggest problem with the whole scenario is on the one side, people are using the protect women's sports, that framing, to not very well, but hide their racist, hateful, bigoted intentions that they have. Because if you listen to the rhetoric and pick any of it apart, it doesn't hold up. If you take like, we want to protect women from men who might kind of sneak in here, then if you're worried about men in women's sports, then where were you when all the abuse and all the other things were happening? I mean, straight men cause way more problems in women's sports. And then, as you point out, the non-existent thing of people pretending to sneak in and be a woman. But as you said, I get frustrated with the leagues and other prominent people who feel like they need to walk this tightrope of not really offending either side somehow of this, when I think if you look at most of the players within, say, a league like the NWSL, and most of the fans, I think fans and the players, for the most part, you're always going to have differences of opinion, but for the most part, feel very strongly in the direction that even though NWSL says we don't have any trans athletes right now in the sport, so they're like, well, there's no right now, so we don't need to worry about it. And I think that is a little bit of a deflection on the league's part. But I think for most people, it's like, but so what? So what if there was? And like, we could get into conversations about competition. We have these both on the men's side and women's side, even if we don't talk about trans in terms of performance enhancing or meeting certain thresholds. But I think this whole argument, I think it hurts everybody with these arguments about, protecting women's sports and stuff we've already seen happen in the NWSL with players, specifically black players, right? But we see it happen, people being called out, being accused of being someone they're not. We see, and then we start having talk of people like doing what? Trying to have, especially at the lower levels when you get out of professional sports, like, how do you check or how do you then check someone's gender or however you want to phrase it? Or, you know, you know, not just that, but how people, which we've seen already, weaponize it, you know, to throw up the doubt, or because I think they look a certain way that fits my image of what a male should be, I'm going to just say they're male, and then you need to prove to me that you're not, kind of thing. This is where we're headed. I mean, we're
Oh,
there
we're
in a lot of
there.
ways.
Yeah, we're there.
But this is where I wish these leagues would just, like, if you want to compete as a woman in women's sports, then compete as a woman in women's sports. And again, as you said, this idea that men somehow, well, I couldn't make it on the men's side, so I'm going to transition to a female so I can do this. Like, ask anybody who is a trans female the shit and the hell they have to put up with. Like, why would anybody do that just to try to further a professional sports career? It just, it doesn't happen. It is not a thing that happens. And unfortunately, again, for people using their hatred and trying to couch it a certain way, like, we have these things that we have these issues keep getting brought up. And because you take a league like the NWSL, because they quietly removed their policy a few years back and they haven't really done anything since then, you now have some players, as we saw just recently, who feel that they can, make a big public statement on protecting women's sports, and then other players, protecting women in sport, and then other players have to speak up saying, no, everybody's welcome. I mean, really, like, shouldn't that be the bottom line? Everybody's welcome. Treat people like human beings. And if people want to love certain people or dress a certain way or behave a certain way or call themselves whatever they want to call them, then let them do that and just work with it. Find a way to move forward with inclusion instead of trying to find ways to constantly exclude people left and right, which is what we're seeing all the time right now. We're seeing that even if someone wants to make some kind of case in terms of hormones or anything else, we're not talking about even a conversation. We'll have a new, I don't know, trans category. So we have men's, women's, and trans. No one's trying to find a solution. People are just trying to find ways to exclude people, and that absolutely drives me crazy.
Well, and nobody's trying to find a solution because, again, it's not a real issue. Like, as
Well,
far as
right.
I'm aware, and I'm not like an encyclopedia of like fucking chromosomes at elite sports level, but the only two instances in my life that I'm aware of somebody at elite levels being having an issue with like being trans, quote unquote, were two women who had like high testosterone levels or some genetic, unique thing that made it so, whatever they registered somewhat. I think it's like Kleinfelder syndrome. It was like it's like XYY or like XXY or something like that. So they like present female, but like do have some male genetic characteristics. Casper Semenya back in like 2012, I think it was Olympics, and then Iman Khalif, the boxer, the other year.
Right.
So it's like it's literally not a thing. First of all, like you said, but it also kind of it. I kind of lost my train of thought, but it kind of it it's kind of one of those things where it's like I think a lot of people maybe they do or maybe they don't, and or maybe they don't take these stances they espouse to the logical end, or maybe they do and they're afraid of it. But like when people go, around saying like, oh, well, trans people shouldn't this, trans people shouldn't that. Like what? Like you said, they never tell you what they think they should, and because they don't think they should, and that's where it's really like hard to take anybody seriously, or have respect for people who like put up this protect women's sports facade, because like you said, it's only ever been used to attack women. Like I think it was what Oklahoma will now like allow genital inspections or whatever in like girls sports in middle schools or high schools. It's like that. How is that fucking helping anybody other than pedophiles, I guess? But like, I don't know. I'm a little all over the place because this gets me a little hot under the collar. But yeah, it's the latest boogeyman weaponized by bad actors. And it unfortunately seems to have stuck a bit better than a lot of the other, made up boogeymen like the migrant caravans and things like that. Not that trans people are made up, but like that they are inflicting issues on women's sports is like a made up thing,
a made up concern.
Right.
Like
the concern,
it's not a problem.
It's not a real concern either. These people aren't actually concerned about the integrity of women's sports, right? They're using it as a way to other trans people because they feel emboldened by societal conditions. And as far as the NWSL goes, it's disappointing, but it's unsurprising. I mean, the NWSL has never struck me as a terribly well-run organization, following in the footsteps of the MLS in a lot of different ways. Excuse me. And this is another really good example of why the franchise model is pretty lame, and why putting the like ethical stances of your clubs in the hands of big capital, is always going to result in bad ethical stances. Because like Wave, I think Wave probably do better like than a lot of NWSL clubs about their inclusion, internal club policy, but they're miles behind what the Sirens do. And if Wave were actually a locally owned and operated club, I'm sure they would look a lot more like what the Sirens do than like what, your generic non-inclusive group might look like. So again, this was a very rambly thing. I don't know that I tied it into a coherent point at all, but I think the idea that like these clubs don't represent us when they're owned by a league franchise model, right? Like SDFC had put out that like letter from Mohammed Mansour, and it was like one of the cringiest things I've ever read. And it's just like, this isn't for us, and this is just a reminder of that.
Yeah. I we'll go ahead and move on from there, because, it is an issue when it comes to women's sports, all sports, unfortunately, right now. But let's transition and look at the structure of the women's game as it stands right now here in 2025, for women's soccer on the professional and pre-professional side. So we have two Division I leagues, NWSL, which we spent a lot of time talking about, and the USL Super League. They are both D1 leagues. There is no league at the D2 level, although we might have one soon. And that's the WPSL Pro, which should be starting in 2027 if things go well. They should have started already based on, stuff they were talking about a few years back, but it's been pushed back to, my best understanding is 2027. We have nothing at what would be the equivalent of Division III on the men's side, but we have a bunch of pre-professional leagues. We have the USLW, we have the WPSL, we have UWS, which was an offshoot of some teams leaving the WPSL when it had a little bit of trouble in the 20 teens area, early 20 teens. And UPSL has a women's league as well as men's. So we have, again, hundreds of women's teams across the country. The big problem I see on the women's side compared to the men's, because it's a little bit different in this respect, whereas we have some summer leagues on the men's pre-professional side, but we also have leagues like the UPSL that play year round. We also have regional leagues like the APSL that play year round. So it's not all summer leagues, but on the pre-professional side, on the women's side, pre-professional soccer on the women's side is all summer leagues that rely at times heavily, depending on the league and the teams, on college soccer players to kind of fill in that gap. And we all know college soccer is going through a huge upheaval, all college sports. So it is going to be interesting to see how the pre-professional area of women's soccer plays out over the next few years as college soccer figures out what it's going to be. And once again, I feel like, and I can only say this about USL because it seems to be the only league that even has a chance of providing structure in multiple tiers, right, compared to any of the others. And I just don't see a plan from USL on the women's side. If we kind of shift gears now to talk about them before we talk about the other leagues. So USL, we have the Super League. It has 9 teams this year. It had 8 teams in its first year, 9 teams this year. I don't know what the expansion looks like moving forward, but it's about comparable to where the NWSL was for their first couple of years. The footprint isn't huge for the Super League. No, we do have a team on the West Coast, Spokane, but again, Spokane's kind of the outlier way out west, where most of the other teams are on the other side of the country. But then you have this huge gap all the way down to the USLW, which is just a summer league. So give me your thoughts on USL and where you'd like to see them go, where they are now, how to move forward, what it could look like maybe in a few years.
Yeah, I don't know. It does kind of feel like USL, they launched hard with the Super League, right? It was supposed to be a second division league, and then
it was originally supposed to be Division 2. Yeah.
Right. They surprised everybody with that announcement, and then they went big with the fall to spring schedule with the intent of like fitting into the global, structure of football kind of economics better, which I thought was a really interesting idea. And then it kind of just feels like they haven't done much with it since then. I know it's going on, but it doesn't feel like they really like market it very hard, or maybe I'm just not, I don't know, following the right circles. But it does make you wonder how much they're committed to it, which is a little bit concerning. And there's also a lot of cross-pollination between, like, I guess this is more like on the NWSL side, but like NWSL clubs who also have a USL club, or like, vice versa. I don't know. It's kind of interesting, and it doesn't feel like they're on as solid footing as they maybe would want us to believe that they are.
That's interesting, because I think I'd have a slightly different take, and I think, like all soccer in the United States, because you can't find a lot on mainstream television, and even on the Golazo network, something that's soccer 24 hours a day, channel devoted to soccer, it's still, because it's CBS, and one of the big CBS properties is Champions League, it's heavily Champions League focused. They do women's sports, so they cover the NWSL. They do almost nothing with the Super League. Very little, really. And very little with USL in general, I'd say, even on Collazo. But if there's all kinds of independent people who talk in this space and share it. And if you follow those, and again, I think this is the story of American soccer. If you follow those people, you are really in the know with what's going on. There's a lot of good information out there. I just don't think it breaks out of those bubbles very well, which is probably what you were alluding to, because you don't really, I think the average person doesn't hear too much about it. But I think, going Division 1, I don't necessarily have a problem with USL really pushing the Super League to be first division. But again, it sets up the pattern of our soccer wars. So now we have 2 first division leagues. the US or the NWSL certainly has a head start in terms of all kinds of things, right? But where they started, I don't know that where NWSL started in 2012, 2013, somewhere around there, is significantly different than where the USL started. But because they've had a decade head start, and because of some big leaps that have happened later, which is the same thing we saw with Major League Soccer, we'll struggle in the beginning, and then about a decade in, starting to make some big strides. And maybe that's what it's going to take for the Super League. But that glaring gap between Super League and USLW has to be filled somehow. I hope USL fills that within their own structure, but it has to be filled. Otherwise, like, how do you take a USLW team from pre-professional summer league to Division One status, short
Well,
of a very wealthy owner?
and this is the problem with having a federation that, like we said, totally abdicates their role in governing domestic soccer, because this, if you recall, is actually the reason that the Super League went D1 instead of D2. They realized that you can't really pay less than the NWSL pays and call it professional, because that wouldn't be a full-time salary. And that's not meant to slander the NWSL, though I do mean it that way. That's not why I bring it up. But it's just to say that, like, there's no step between the two, because somebody who, if you were to like create a financial step between the two, it would just be like it would be semi-professional. And if you are a person who's not going to make a full-time living, like, why would you then commit to all the time that goes into this ostensibly professional league but not get the pay out of it's, I'm not saying I know what the answer is, but when you try to do everything within the framework of capital, like, this is what happens, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's you know, I don't see the NWSL slowing down. I don't see them ever working with any other league. They've pretty much set their sights based on especially what they've done the last 2 years. Of they are moving forward to be like, the WNBA or Major League Soccer, but these leagues that are closed, if you're lucky enough to be a part of it before we finish growing. And in fact, I could see the NWSL, it feels like to me, the NWSL would be just as happy to move to closer to a basketball style of number of teams and conferences and play that way with playoffs, fully Americanize it and not do the world's game. At least right now, the talk that I'm hearing, things that I hear people say, which I think is a shame. I think in the long run, it's going to hurt the women's game in this country that we don't have any kind of coherent structure. Whereas if in a perfect world, if you had the NWSL sit on top and maybe the USL structure sit underneath it, and you did promotion relegation and everybody kind of understood, what their goals were and what they were trying to be as part of the pyramid, like you see in other countries with different leagues, I think we could have a super strong, robust women's game in this country that isn't just up here at the top if you can make it, but you're out of luck otherwise. I mean, I look at our local product, Christina Birkenrode, who Cesar Hernandez at ESPN did a great profile on her. Someone that, I wasn't actually playing at the time when I was out there, but I met and interviewed for a soccer shorts thing that I did, playing with Bridge Barcata. And she was, if I remember correctly, playing with Orlando in the NWSL. And I don't know if that's when Alex Morgan was out on. Yeah. But anyway, Alex Morgan came in and she basically got bumped and cut. And there weren't very many teams. So good players couldn't go. So she went to Mexico. She's been, well, actually, she went to Europe, but she's now playing in Mexico for Monterrey. And she's been one of their stellar forwards that they've had, for the last, I don't know, 4 years, 5 years, something close to that. So I think, again, we have the players. I really wish, even though it's frustrating on the men's side that we don't have it, there would have been some better foresight through US soccer to really, and everybody working with it to try to develop a system that really improved the women's game at all levels and not just at the top level where people thought they could. I don't know. To me, it's just owners playing with toys, and they have an investment and don't really care about the bigger investment in the game over time, which is not necessarily what owners should be doing. I mean, I get that. It's an owner, they're an investor, they have an investment and they're competing in the sports arena. But US soccer should absolutely be looking at that and how to structure things and get people working together for the benefit of the game at all levels and not just for any one particular group. But, US soccer had its hands in developing the NWSL and get it started and paying salaries of national team players before they kind of pulled out and let NWSL go on its own. Not much different than what they did with Major League Soccer. It wasn't really paying people salaries, but preferential treatment to Major League Soccer to get going to the expense of the rest of the pyramid.
Well, and this is what I mean when I say that the lack of a unified pyramid is bad for player development. Because if you don't give players like that, the story you mentioned, like that, if you don't give them somewhere to go, they might just not keep playing. But there are so many players who are like late bloomers. And the thing I think a lot of people gloss over is that there are plenty of players who like don't even really make it as a pro until after they're older than 23, which is ostensibly the age cutoff for MLS Next Pro, right? I mean, look at your Jamie Vardy's of the world. He signed with Leicester City when he was like 24 or 25 years old, I think. And after playing in non-league, right? And so you need to give people a place to continue to ply their trade and develop and grow. And maybe they don't ever become more than a non-league or second division player, whatever it is. But you're cheating your soccer development pyramid of a lot of these like late bloomer type players who end up being some of the best players sometimes. Because you're not giving them anywhere to go, just so, like you said, some rich people can make a few more bucks.
Yeah. All right. Well, as we get close to wrapping things up here, let's take a quick look at women's soccer in San Diego specifically. We did an episode on this last spring, so we'll do just a quick highlight. But we have, I can't remember the number off the top of my head. I'm going to say 8. I think there was something about 8 teams that play in the WPSL. And here in San Diego, we're very partial to the WPSL. It has existed for a very long time with lots of teams in San Diego participating because one of the San Diego teams way back when, the Auto Trader team and stuff that became the Sea Lions, they were founding members of the original WPSL. And that was a strong women's team because there was no professional league at the time for women. So even national team players that wanted to have a place to play needed to find a league. And in the very, very beginning, 30-ish years ago, it was the WPSL. And, we have, again, strong connections to the WPSL here in San Diego and a league in the WPSL that's mostly San Diego teams and a few like Orange County teams. And we do also have one team as of last year in USLW. So I don't know how that might change in the future, but we do. Women's soccer has always been very strong in Southern California and San Diego. And you see some good soccer being played at this WPSL level. I wish some of these athletes had an avenue to go to the next step that may not be the giant leap all the way to Division One. And again, with so few spots, as you said, some people who are late bloomers or may just need a little bit more time or just need to be in a competitive professional environment in a year or two might be able to make that step. but they don't. And we get a lot of people who play just because they love playing, they love the game, but they know there's not really there's not a at the moment strong stepping stones for them to move up. But we do have a strong circuit of pre-professional soccer here in San Diego. I'll give you a chance to jump in, and then we'll start wrapping things up.
I mean, we've talked about this before, but there's so, especially here in Southern California in general, there's such a density of soccer culture. I mean, we could have our own several level pyramid here in Southern California alone, on both the men's and women's sides. So it's kind of a shame that there isn't more of an effort towards something like that. I don't know. I haven't heard of any sort of like regionalization talk, and I'd be very skeptical. But yeah, it's all over the place if you know what to look for.
Yeah, and I'm gonna pull this up as we're sorry, we'll bring Dylan back in here, but we'll pull this map up on the screen for those who are watching on the YouTube side. But it is a map of all the teams just in Southern California. I don't know how many there are right here. I'd have to really dive in. And some of these badges are overlapping other badges. But you look at the number of teams here just in Southern California, and as Dylan just pointed out, there could be several tiers of soccer. Now, this includes NWSL, and we don't have any Super League teams down here, but then the other leagues, WPSL, USLW. We have some UWS teams in Southern California and UPSL teams in Southern California. So if they all weren't affiliated with their own leagues and they came together, even in a Southern California circuit of, I don't know, 12 teams, right? You could have several tiers and start slowly separating out the teams who want to be more successful and to give a slightly more competitive environment. And I think over time, like some of those teams might be able to move up into more of a regional structure and play, to get to maybe your national footprint. But again, this was my whole reason in the last couple episodes for proposing those independent regional pyramids. I think not only is there that big gap financially between your pre-professional and then going to Division One, which is where we are on the women's side, but also you're changing from taking like carpooling or taking a bus and traveling a couple hours at most to your matches to now all of a sudden having to do charter flights and fly 3,000 miles to go to games. Like, it is too big of a leap. And I think that is also a challenge that the Super League is seeing in trying to increase their footprint is we have such a large country. To go back to what I said the last couple episodes, I think we need to look at it differently if we really want to grow, because we have pockets of dense activity in soccer that, if provided the right structure, and again, men's or women's side, could really see some teams and clubs and players thrive if we built a better structure.
Well, and this is another issue with the franchise structure is that these clubs can't act in true, focus of self-determination, right? Like they are to some extent bound to act in the interests of the league writ large. Like imagine if, San Diego Wave and Los Angeles FC, or not FC, Los Angeles, Angel City, excuse me, were truly independent clubs and decided that, hey, there's a lot of teams here in SoCal. We could make a bunch of money and travel way less far and just make a league here in SoCal. I mean, I'm not saying they would, but they could do that if they had that self-determination that they don't have as a franchise. So that's another issue that it creates. But also, it's we've talked about this several times. It's part of the problem of working from that national level, top-down kind of approach. You're trying to create a national footprint without the infrastructure, and it's like just genuinely very difficult to do.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's wrap it up there for this episode on women's soccer in the U.S. Dylan, as we look forward to next week, what are your soccer plans?
I'm just keeping up on the USL playoffs. The men's side has been pretty entertaining. So,
It has been entertaining. I will be following that. I believe the Women's Champions League are going this week, so I'll be trying to
yes.
catch some of those matches as well. Um, Also heard, I don't know if you heard on CBS Sports, because I know most of the schedule here in the fall is they have the Champions League on the men's side happen one week, and then usually the next week the women's side, or somewhere close to that. But there are going to be some overlapping dates on early December. I want to say around the 12th. And I saw a little blurb with CBS Sports where basically the men's Champions League desk and the women's Champions League desk, they're going to, I don't know whether they're flying to London or whether they're going to be in New York, but they're going to kind of merge their two desks and have a big super show to
Cool.
cover all of it. Champions League on the men's side and Champions League on the women's side. And I think that's fantastic. I think
Yeah,
that's a
definitely.
great way to help, um, maybe for some fans, build a little more awareness of what's happening on the women's side, but also just having that big crossover of some of the best soccer that you can see on the European continent being played at the same time with those teams. And yeah, I'm excited. I think I don't always watch the pregame show and other things around the matches. I usually find a match, on
Hmm.
CBS Sports. They stream and watch that, or I watch maybe their Golazo, all the goals one. We're gonna just flip around through all the matches if I just have it in the background. But I'm really looking forward to that particular day. I think I'm going to carve out some time on my schedule, and I hope they do it justice on both sides, and it doesn't get overly dominated by one side or the other.
Yeah, that'll be good. That's for all my gripes about CBS writ large, their soccer coverage has been pretty good.
Their soccer coverage has
They
been very
haven't let
good. Yeah.
Barry get her little tendrils on that one yet.
Yeah. God. Hopefully never. We'll see. All right. For us, that wraps up another episode of the LGS Pod. If you have a question or comment about tonight's show, please drop us a note. You can leave us a comment here on our YouTube channel. You can send us a note via Blue Sky. We're at soccershorts.bigpinedigital.com. You can send us a text if you're listening to us through any of your podcast feeds. Look in the description at the top. You'll see a little send us a text link, and you can send us a question or a comment about the show. But better yet, as always, as we ask if you have the time, we usually go live at 6 o'clock on Tuesday nights. You're welcome to join us and jump in on the chat with us during our live stream. All right, Dylan, any final comments before we head out this evening?
No, nothing really in particular. Looking forward to the next round of the Open Cup qualifying. I didn't realize it was a rematch, so that's pretty entertaining.
Yeah, makes it more entertaining, and I think it would be fun to get some people to go and see if we can get a San Diego representative in the Open Cup proper first round. So
Definitely.
definitely looking forward to that. All right, that wraps up our show, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see everyone again next week. Good night.